Hello, welcome to episode 15 of Learning Photography. Just wanted to chat about a couple of things. We've been using manual mode for all these exercises so far, and the question may come up in your mind, if really what we're interested in is getting a shallow depth of field, or freezing action so we don't get a blurry picture, and those are controlled by aperture and shutter speed respectively. Why don't we just use the priority modes, aperture priority or shutter priority? And that's a good question. But one of the main reasons I'm using manual and asking you to use manual with me is so that you learn all the different controls you have over your image or the resulting image when you take a picture. We've seen in that one episode where if you just chose auto, you'd get a silhouetted image of your friend standing in front of a very bright background. But if we take control, then we know, well, wait a minute, we need to overexpose the image so that our subject is exposed correctly. And so that's the rationale for working in manual, or at least having total control. You can do that in aperture priority or shutter priority, but by working in manual, you're learning all the aspects. It's kind of like, in phys ed in high school, you played a lot of different things, and through that you learn which things you really enjoyed playing, and maybe you went out for the team. That's a stretch perhaps, but it's sort of the same idea. We're kind of getting an idea of all the possibilities. It's like a liberal education. You go and you study a lot of different things until you figure out what it is that really captures your passion. So we're going to continue to work in manual in the next several episodes, and for most of the episodes. Because, as I said, I want you to learn how you can control the balancing of light by changing shutter speed and reciprocating, so that one, if you take light away using one, you get it back by using another. However, in this episode and the next episode, we're going to work with the priority mode, so you're familiar with them. Spend a lot of time on it. We'll come back to it because there are times actually when using a priority mode probably makes more sense than using manual, or for that matter, using program mode makes more sense. There are times when I like to use ISO manually and I control it, but there are times when auto ISO makes a lot more sense, and we'll talk about those situations as well and illustrate them through taking some pictures. So in this first episode of these two parts, we're going to work with aperture priority. Typically what a photographer wants to do is control depth of field. And so that's typically the priority mode that photographers, if you ask 20 photographers on the street, which priority mode which mode do you most often shoot in, they're going to say aperture priority, I bet. I would bet a milkshake on that. That's my highest bet. So let's get started and work a little bit with aperture priority, and then look at the disadvantages and advantages of using aperture priority. Okay, so let's find some place to take some pictures. All right, I'm down here on the ground, and the sun's going in and out, so I may turn out to be a little bit overexposed, but I made it so that hopefully this in front of us is exposed properly. And we want to shoot in aperture priority. Now, I'm going to turn my camera on, got my lens cap off. I want to turn my mode dial to the A on my camera. If you have a Canon, it's probably AV. And when you're shooting in aperture priority, you're choosing the aperture, remember, and the camera is going to choose the shutter speed. And you can choose to shoot in auto ISO, or you can select the ISO. I prefer to select the ISO. So set your ISO to 200, and obviously try to do this outside in a bright area. We're having crazy weather on the east coast of the United States, and the daffodils are out. So I'm going to take advantage of that. And what I want to do is go for a shallow depth of field. So I'm going to choose an aperture. Which aperture do I want to use? A big number or a small number? Right, a small number, because that gives me the biggest hole. And with the biggest hole, more light's coming in, but the depth of field is made shallower and shallower. 2.8 feet into the pool. Okay, so now the thing you'll notice on your screen, if you look at the LCD and it displays on your LCD, you may have to look through your lens to see this, is that I've chosen, well, let me go here. I'm going to choose a, I'm going to choose my lens will go to 2.8, so I'm going to go to 2.8. That's as wide open as I can make my lens. What you'll notice is that as you change the aperture value with your dial, you will see the shutter speed changing as you do that. And then there's another set of numbers that should always stay at 0. Unless you turn a dial to change them, it always stays at 0. That's exposure compensation, and actually we're going to talk about that in the episode after these two. So I'm at 2.8. It's telling me, so let me beat on. What I'm trying to do is take a picture of this little statue and that flower behind it. And what I want to do, now I just got a whole bunch of sun. What I want to do is I want the flower to be in focus. I don't like that flower. Well, no. I'm going to make the little guy in focus, and that will hopefully make the daffodil go kind of blurry. And I'm getting the camera's telling me that it needs to use 1/1000th of a second. I take the shot, and let's take a look at it. And, yep, he's in focus. He's a little dark because of the shadows, and the flower is not in focus very well. So this time, I'm going to focus on the flower. Actually, I'm going to do another thing. See the blossom on the left-hand side? I'm going to focus on that by half pressing, but then I'm going to move my camera so that the little guy is in the picture more. Try to get rid of that water catcher. So I'm focusing on the daffodil to the left. I'm coming over, holding my button down, and taking a shot. And as I look at the result, let's see what that looks like. If you look closely, if you zoom in, the little guy's a little fuzzy, and that blossom is in pretty good focus. Now it is using a fast shutter. That looks a little soft, really. So let's try that again. Okay, so let's take a look at that one. And the flower's in focus. And if I zoom in, no, it's in pretty sharp focus, and the little guy is fuzzy. Now let's say I want all of these in focus, plus there's some blossoms over the upper right-hand corner, some blossoms over there. So let's go for them. Now, what do we need to do if we want a deep depth of field? We need to go to the deep end of the pool, where it's 11 feet deep. So let's go ahead and just change our aperture. And see, we don't really have to count or anything, because we're not going to compensate. The camera's doing that for us. And we'll go to F11. All right, so now as I take a shot of this whole scene, I need to zoom out a little bit. And I'm focusing on the blossom right behind, to the right of the little guy, to your right of the little guy. And I've got the blossoms in the background in the frame. And they look fuzzy when I look through the lens, because when you're looking through the lens, you're looking at the widest aperture. You're looking at the scene through the widest aperture. So if we look at that picture, and we zoom in on the front flower, it's in focus. And if we go up, remember in zoom mode, you can move around the display. They're a little soft, but they're not too bad. Part of the deal was, let's see, if we look at that and we take a look at the info button or display button to change what's displayed, I had an 1/80th of a second aperture, which should have frozen those, but there was a fair amount of wind blowing when I took the picture. So it may not have. So that's aperture control. Now we could change the ISO to auto, but we'll do that later. There's a reason that you choose to do that. And right now, I want to be in control at least of those two things, aperture and ISO. So we've tried a shallow depth of field and a deep depth of field using aperture priority. Not a whole lot different than working in manual, but hopefully, because we've worked in manual, you're feeling a little more comfortable with understanding why we're doing that and what the camera's doing. And that's part of the reason, too, to learn all this stuff, is that you better understand what the camera's doing, and you know when to step in and say, whoa, you got it wrong, we need to fix this. Okay? So what are the disadvantages and advantages of using shutter priority over using, say, manual? Well, one advantage is that you don't have to worry about anything except the aperture, especially if you set your camera to auto ISO. You're just really concerned about getting the aperture that you want to get the effect that you want, either a deep depth of field or a shallow depth of field. The disadvantage, however, can be that if you're especially in kind of a low light situation and you want a deep depth of field, so you're going for something like f8 or 11, and the camera will choose an aperture that is very, very slow. Now, some cameras will let you put a bottom limit on aperture. Don't go below, or not aperture, on shutter speed. Don't go below, say, 1/60th of a second. But not all cameras do that. Even with auto ISO, I found that it still sometimes will go to a very slow shutter speed, and it's not pushing the ISO as high as I think it could go. And I don't have a limit on it, really, because that's, again, a feature, or rather a control, that you can tell the camera, don't go above this certain amount. So to me, that's the biggest disadvantage of using shutter or aperture priority when you're in low light situations. So those are advantages and disadvantages. Stay tuned for episode 16, where we're going to look at shutter priority. And remember to stay in control of your camera. Thank you.